All right, so I had not planned to shoot this today, but I am in my office and was set up for a work thing and just figured, why not? Let's talk cameras. Okay, so the Konica C35 Automatic is a 2 megapixel camera from 2001. No, it's not. It's a film camera. It is a film 35 millimeter Rangefinder film camera from the 70s. I very sadly don't have it on me right now because, as I mentioned, I wasn't planning to shoot this film, but I will insert photographs here of this really lovely little box of a camera. It is essentially fully automatic in every way other than like winding, loading, rewinding, advancing, all of those things. So it has a real manual feel, but all the exposure values are automatic. There were many versions of this camera, and that's in fact how I came to this camera. Was I originally had the Konica Auto S3, which is also, it's actually a shutter priority camera, and it's a wonderful, wonderful little camera. I loved it, but I have a relatively recent kind of relationship with film cameras whereby I do not like spending a lot of money on them. I guess that's kind of a recent evolution to all of my camera equipment, but specifically with film, I've had like the Mamiya 7, the Mamiya 6, I've had the RZ67, I've had a lot of really incredible film cameras, but I've sold all of them because what I don't love is knowing that these cameras will eventually fail, and they are fully electronic cameras, and when they do, I will have a very pricey brick to put on my mantle. Basically, selling that Auto S3, I had built out a beautiful kit with the X-14 flash, the close-up adapter, which is so hysterical looking. I'll put a picture in here. But the whole kit I sold for like $500. And then I bought the Konica C35 Automatic for $30. And I felt really good about that. It's a fixed focal range of 38 millimeters at f2.8. It is a camera that, you know, you do have to manually dial in the ISO setting. It takes anywhere from 25 to 400 on the ISO dial, so it's kind of a little bit more limited. The shutter speed goes from 1/30th of a second to 650, and it focuses from 1 meter to infinity. So it's a really simple camera, and that is one of the things I really like about it. I love that it has this point and shoot vibe, essentially, but it gives me the one thing that I do want manual control over, which is the focus. Along with those other cameras I mentioned, I've also owned the Yashica T4, I have owned the Pentax G2 and G1. Love those cameras, they're fantastic. The optics are bar none superb to almost anything in the film world in the 35 millimeter range. But the thing that drove me crazy, particularly with the G1, and I really think the focus issues that people harp on about are kind of overstated in a lot of ways, but I did find that on all of those cameras, I would point and shoot, and the thing that it would pick as the focus was not the thing I was trying to focus on. So this little camera gives me the focus control, but it automatically meters, and the meter is really good. So that I really, really like. And I love that it's super small. It is very much like pocketable, purseable. It's 380 grams, so super light. It's like not heavy duty construction. Mine actually has kind of like a wonky door. It like doesn't look like it should be light tight, but it is. So, you know, it feels like it's not a precious camera, but it does the job in all the ways that I need it to do. So then the other thing is that lens. That Hexanon lens is really, really nice. I don't know how to describe it. It has kind of, it's sharp. I think that that's the main thing. It's sharp, but it doesn't feel overly sharp or overly clinical or overly modern. It has character. And I really like that. And that 38 millimeter focal length is kind of perfect for, in my mind, like it's not so tight that you're at a 50, but it's not so wide that you're at a 35. It's just in the sweet spot where you can kind of do landscape and portrait. One of the cons is just a byproduct of being a rangefinder, which is that your closest focusing distance is 3.3 feet or a meter. And that is one thing I wish I could get a little closer, but that's true of any rangefinder. So I kind of have learned to live with that. And also, one of the things that I love is that despite being auto exposure, you can kind of manipulate the auto exposure. So if you half press, it will lock the meter and then you can recompose and focus. So that to me is like the perfect combination, and I do that frequently. Like I'll be out and about in the world, I will focus, or not focus, but I will meter off of the grass or off the gray cement, half press, lock that meter, pull up and recompose and focus, and then I have the shot exactly how I would want it. And it has a little needle metering system, so kind of similar to a lot of the cameras of that day or that era. You'll see the exposure value. It's like linked, so f4 is linked with, I can't remember, a 60th of a second or something like that. So you'll see on the side, and it's very visible. You just watch that meter on the side, and if you're in the red on the top or the bottom, you know you're out of the safety zone. And if you want to live life dangerously, you can take the picture anyway. It's not going to stop you from taking the picture. Let's see, the other thing that is awesome about this camera is that the meter itself is on the lens, like within the lens barrel. So if you put filters on top, like an ND filter or something, it will automatically include that exposure compensation into its reading versus the meter being on top or something like that, where you then have to do the mental gymnastics of like, oh, this is a half stop, more light or less light, et cetera, et cetera. And if you do have the right flash, like the X-14 flash, it kind of, the whole point of this camera, or the selling sort of feature of this camera, was that it was automatic flash and it wouldn't lock you at 1/25th of a second, which I think one of the maybe the FD, the 35 FD does. But this one automatically, I mean the automatic in Konica C35 Automatic, the automatic is actually in reference to not the auto exposure necessarily, but like the automatic exposure in relation to flash. I don't have my X-14 anymore, so I didn't really get to test this out with this camera, which I bought, you know, not that long ago, probably a year ago. So I can't really speak to it, but it was kind of the selling feature of the camera, so I trust it works. What don't I love about it? So one of the things that I don't love is that it takes one of these outdated PX675 Mercury batteries, which you can't get anymore. Don't try. I mean, you can. Apparently they're still selling them out of Russia, but I wouldn't, it's illegal. Don't do it. But I just use an LR44 and it works fine for me. I do usually rate my film like a stop, not more. I would say I think for all my 400 film, I'm rating it at 200. So I'm just giving it one stop more light. I would kind of do that normally anyway. And I would say it's probably giving me like more box speed look, because the meter with that battery is not totally exactly what it would be with the PX675. So just, you know, rate your film a stop over and you'll be fine. And use that exposure locking trick. Works every time. Then, last things, and I totally feel like Nico on the news right now, by the way, like all this is corporate setting. Nico, love you. I hope I'm saying that right, Nico. If you don't follow his channel, you should. I'm going to put the link up here, but he does all the film news and it's fantastic and his whole setup is amazing, and I just major shout out. The other thing I don't love about this camera, which is something that would be mitigated if I used it a lot, I would just learn how to use it better. But currently, because I don't use it all the time, I find myself like framing a little bit skewed to the left, which I don't totally understand, because when I'm looking through the viewfinder, I see it straight, but there must be some trickery happening with the lens or something, and I'm just not getting it right. So all of my frames are just slightly off to the left, but I'm not a purist, so I have no issue fixing that in post and saying like, this is my film shot sorry, you're not seeing the negative. And like if you were scanning the edges and stuff, you wouldn't be able to do that. But I'm not. So for me, not an issue. And then again, the thing that I had mentioned previously was the fact that it is fully electronic. It will die. I know that. But again, it's $30, so I'm at peace. Not something I'm complaining about. Finally, and sort of the last thing I'll say more generally, is that it is a film camera, and that is something I love and hate at the same time. Doing the math, it's like on average for like a Portra 400 or something like that, it's like $18 a roll, plus in my current film lab, it's $22 to develop and scan for like just average scans. So that works out to like $1.10 a shot, and that's expensive. I mean, it's more than I want to be spending per shot because I shoot like crazy and all the time. I mean, shooting my kids like way too much. They'll hate me when they're older, but they'll love me too because they'll have really nice photos of themselves. But it's just really expensive. There are definitely workarounds. If you shot a lot of film, you could obviously bulk load, you could shoot black and white, you could develop at home. There are a lot of workarounds, but as a mom of two, I don't have time for that. And that's actually what led me into these early digital cameras, which I love so much and which I talk about on this channel. I was led to those early digital cameras because they give me a lot of what film gave me, which is kind of the slower pace, the more unique colors coming out of the CCD, sensors. But I still love film. I still shoot film. I just bought a new film camera, which I threw into the box of cameras and will hopefully draw soon because I'm really excited to shoot it. So I do love it, but it's expensive. So that's a con. I love sort of the underdog brands. Like I love Pentax, I love Olympus. I would say those are my two modern brands that I love the most. And then I also love these old film brands that you don't really hear that much about. Konica being a great example. Do you know any Konica film cameras? I mean, they had SLRs, they had these great rangefinders, they had great optics. And I just don't see them talked about a lot. So I'm really curious to know if anyone is shooting with any of those cameras. Minolta is another brand. I totally have old Minolta film cameras. My dad shot with a Minolta. He was a professional photographer my whole childhood, and I still have his old Minolta SLRs or DSLRs. No, not DSLRs. SLRs. For DSLRs, Ulysses Grant Parm just covered the Minolta Dimage A2 in this video as one of his recommendations. And thank you for the shout out, Ulysses. I would love to shoot with a camera. I have not shot with that one yet. I actually haven't shot with anything on their digital side, but their old film cameras hold a very near and dear place in my heart. All right, moving on to the next camera. I'm going to throw to my future self and draw what that will be. But first, I just wanted to say that if you're subscribed to this channel, I will be drawing a name in the next week, and that person will be reached out to by myself for their shipping address, and I will be sending 8 rolls of expired Kodak Gold 200. So if you're interested in that, subscribe, and I will reach out to you shortly if you are drawn. Okay, next camera is... One thing I forgot to mention, which is really kind of critical, is this lens cap. Make sure you have a lens cap one way or another, whether it comes with the camera or you get it in addition to the camera, because like I had mentioned, the meter is here, and if it's exposed to light, it is on. So that battery, the LR44 or a Wein cell or whatever you end up using for your battery, will die very rapidly if you do not cover this up. So small tip there. Last thing not last thing, but one other thing I wanted to mention is that it does have an interesting lens flare, and I thought this was actually just my camera that was doing it, but as you'll see in these photographs, there's like this kind of little crescent moon that happens on the edges sometimes, and I actually saw this in some other people's reviews online, so I know it's not just my camera. Thought I would call it out. I don't mind it. It gives me vibes, but if that's not your jam, don't get this camera. And speaking of vibes, I have to call out this video, shooting more like fashiony, vibey stuff, and it is a fantastic example of what you can do with this camera. So go check that out. Last thing I will say is thank you. We are at 100+ subscribers right now, and I wasn't really looking to grow this channel as its kind of purpose, but the community around this like nerdy, geeky, and I'm allowed to say that because I'm the huge proponent of it, but nerdy, geeky camera, early digital tech, film is so awesome. I'm getting DMs and talking to y'all, and I just want to say thank you for the comments. Thank you for the reach out. I want to keep doing this, more collabs, more fun, more cameras. So appreciate you all. And the very last thing is the camera draw. So what we're going to be shooting for the next 2 weeks. Let's see. Excited. Okay. Fuji S5 Pro. If you do not know about this camera, go check it out right now. I will be reviewing it in 2 weeks, but this is a super rad camera that I have not spent enough time with. So I purchased it last summer. I have not used it nearly enough, but I have a couple of lenses for it. I have the 35mm f2 Nikon. It's a Fuji camera with a Nikon mount. It's a real interesting backstory, and I will get into it further in 2 weeks. So come back then when we will have the Fuji S5 Pro. Go check me out on Instagram if you want to see shots from this over the next 2 weeks when I dig in and find out what this little baby has to offer.